إيقاف التسجيل. زر. إيقاف فويس أوفر.
Hello and welcome to my office at Tel Aviv University. Today we are going to speak via Skype with Professor Amira Benison from the University of Cambridge. Amira is an expert in the history, the pre-modern history of North Africa and Iberia. She extensively researched society, culture and politics of that region. We are going to learn from her about the visual, textual, politics and legitimacy of the late Abbasid period. So, let's make the call.
Hello.
Hello, Amira. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fine. How is Cambridge?
Very good. It's autumnal and a bit chilly, but otherwise very nice.
Very good. I want to ask you a few questions with regard to our lesson. Our lesson is dedicated to the Abbasids and their empire. We discussed, for instance, the limits of the Abbasid power, but our geographical focus has been the Eastern domain. And being an expert about the Western world, the Western Islamic world, I want to ask you first, can you please sketch the political map for us? Who were the main players in the Abbasid period in the West?
Okay, the main players in the Islamic West are regimes in the Iberian Peninsula, so primarily the Umayyads, and a number of different breakaway principalities in North Africa founded by Kharijites and also by Idris, a descendant of the Prophet.
Mm-hmm. And who are the Kharijites? For those who don't remember.
The Kharijites are a breakaway sect who have a very different idea of who should rule the Islamic world to either the Umayyads or the Abbasids. They don't think that the caliphate should be ruled by an aristocratic Meccan lineage, even if they are descendants of the Prophet. They think that rule should be in the hands of the best qualified Muslim, regardless of his background.
This political periodization is very different from what we know of from Damascus and Baghdad. There, it's very clear. There are first the Umayyads, 661 to 750, and then afterwards the Abbasids, 750 to 1258. Here in the West, you describe several different rulers ruling at the same time. This is a good point to ask. How do you describe the relationship between the Abbasid Caliphate vis-a-vis North Africa and Iberia, or vice versa, the Islamic West vis-a-vis the Abbasid Caliphate?
It's a very complicated relationship, I think. Although there's sort of political differences between the two areas, and the West is ruled by a number of different groups, at the same time, they're very plugged into the Abbasid world through pilgrimage, through trade, through education.
Mm-hmm. This is a very stormy period. If I use your own words, you talk about Baghdad as being stormy seas in order to describe the turbulences of the Abbasid period. Do you think this is a good description, a good term also for the Islamic West?
Yes, I think it is. I think, politics in this period is very turbulent for lots of different reasons. There aren't established patterns of succession anywhere in the Islamic world. There's almost always a fight between eligible men wherever you look, whether it's in the Islamic East or the Islamic West. So I think stormy seas is a fairly good term across the board, but the important thing is that that's affecting a small elite at the top of society, not necessarily everybody.
So politically is one thing. You describe more or less maybe a de facto independence. Really, was it the Islamic West? Was it independent politically from the East? Or am I exaggerating?
It's not completely politically independent. I mean, what's now Tunisia and Libya were part of the Abbasid Caliphate until the rise of the Fatimid Caliphate and then for a long time Tunisia and Libya were connected to Egypt and Syria, sort of under common Fatimid rule. And as you move further west, there are all kinds of different relationships with the central Islamic lands. Even when there's political independence, there's, as you said, there are these links through trade, commerce, pilgrimage, and education, which connect people to the Abbasid world in a more general sense.
If we discuss the politics so far, what about society and culture? What were the characteristics in that regard of Iberia and North Africa?
It's different to the Islamic East in many ways. I think one point to make about North Africa, of course, is that it's inhabited by the Berbers, who are speakers of a number of different connected languages, who have their own culture, and they're not Arabs. The Iberian Peninsula is different, but again, although we describe it as an Arab society because it's Arabized, the majority of the Muslim population in Iberia were indigenous Iberians who'd converted to Islam. So there are lots of local cultural trends and tendencies which you see across this region.
How did people make a living? We mentioned trade. What else did they do in North Africa and Iberia?
These areas are predominantly rural. We hear a lot about the towns, and they are very, very important as hubs of learning and commerce and power, but most people lived in the countryside. In the Iberian Peninsula, they were mostly peasants living in villages, tilling the land, growing wheat, olives, fruits. In North Africa, it's a little bit different because people were organized by tribe, but they were also predominantly living off the land, either as farmers in small villages or as pastoralists moving their herds backwards and forwards. And as you get down to the Sahara, you get the fully nomadic tribes, often camel herders, who are moving from waterhole to waterhole.
How these two different cultures coincide? The urban culture, very sedentary, and rural, maybe also nomadic. So how these two work together?
I think most people studying the medieval Islamic world now see them as symbiotic, in that towns sort of didn't end as abruptly as we sometimes think. There would be market gardens around towns. Gradually settlement would get more sparse as you move out to the countryside. So there's a lot of connectivity between town and country, and obviously from a political perspective. So there's a kind of backwards and forwards between town and countryside.
These local dynasties, and North Africa and Iberia were controlled very much by local dynasties. What did they rely on in order to legitimize themselves? The Umayyads in Spain, in Iberia, had the memory of the Umayyads in Damascus, which could be very useful, or not. We'll hear in a minute from you. But the other or the smaller dynasties, the more local ones, what did they have in order to legitimize their power?
Yes, as you point out, the Umayyads do make reference to their important ancestry, their caliphal ancestry. They often describe themselves as sons of caliphs, but if you take them a couple of hundred years before they sort of dared, if you like, make a claim to the caliphate again. And they are, in fact, an important model for all of North Africa. Many North Africans visited Cordoba during the Umayyad Emirate and Caliphate and sort of witnessed displays of Islamic power there and sort of exported some of those ideas back to North Africa.
The Umayyads had also maybe material objects to display their wealth, their power. The lesser dynasties, did they use the same visual or material language?
They use modified forms of the same visual language, and obviously the Umayyads, when Abdurrahman III reclaimed the caliphate, he built a grand caliphal city, a palatine city, Madinat al-Zahra, outside Cordoba, which was constructed as a stage for displays of power, where he could show his fine artifacts Islamic world. And North Africans who witnessed that did experiment with the same ideas within North Africa. And when you get the rise of the Almoravids in the 11th century and the Almohads in the 12th century, they both create massive Palatine cities and complexes in Marrakesh. I mean, in fact, the Almoravids found Marrakesh, so without them we wouldn't have that city. And later on, the Marinids, who are also tribesmen, when they take over first, they build an entirely new Palatine city alongside Old Furs, which again is a place where they can display their military power, display their patronage of religion, sort of host embassies from other areas, and generally sort of display their importance, but also their devotion to Islam in a variety of different ways.
How would you show your devotion to Islam in that period? How could you do that if you want?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Different regimes did it differently. The Almohads used the so-called Quran of Uthman, which they claim to have got from Umayyad Cordoba, in fact, and they used to progress through the countryside with it, as well as displaying it in the Great Mosque of Marrakesh on occasion. Banners with religious inscriptions are also widely used. Another way of showing devotion to religion was through founding religious buildings. With the Marinids, we see the introduction of madrasa to what's now Morocco, and the Marinids founded numerous madrasas. They also began to patronise festivals which were becoming important to the population, in particular the Mawlid, or the Prophet's birthday, and they put a lot of money into having grand celebrations for the birthday of the Prophet, and handing out money and gifts to both religious scholars and to mystics, to Sufis.
So foundation of madrasas, schools and festivals, alongside also the foundation of different dynasties. It seems that the Islamic world is fragmented, no more a unified ummah. So how do you think the ummah, what the ummah means in that period? Was there a unified caliphate at that time?
I think caliphate and ummah are quite different concepts, really, and I would say that you have a universal Islamic empire to start with, but that's ruled by a small number of people, and the Muslims are actually a minority, although a ruling minority in their own empire. But as more and more people convert to Islam, you begin to see the emergence of the Islamic world, if you like, the ummah as a community of people, and they want to participate in government. So there's, if you like, a certain amount of decentralization or devolution. I think when we talk about disintegration or fragmentation, it makes it sound negative. But in terms of actually personal experience, devolved government might be better.
Okay, so absolutely, this was a very turbulent period in the West as well as in the East. And now I want to turn to something different. I want to ask you a personal question. I take this opportunity to ask all my colleagues about their choice of careers. So what brought you to be interested in the pre-modern North Africa?
Well, the first thing that sort of drew me into the study of the Islamic world was actually calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy, Islamic art and architecture, which I found very appealing. I was studying history at that time, so I was also studying modern Middle Eastern history, and I just decided to move back in time, which I've gradually done, and I said maybe I'll move forward in time again, who knows.
Thank you very much. It was illuminating, and thank you again for taking the time to speak with us.
Not at all. Thank you.